Hey, welcome back to another episode of Macro Social Work Your Way. I am Marthea Pitts, and for those who are new to my platform, welcome. A little bit about me. I am a 3-time award-winning workforce development career counselor and macro social worker. This is my part of the internet where I talk about all things macro social work careers. So enough about that. I am super excited today because I have one of the alum of my 6-week group career coaching program called Micro to Macro. And we're going to talk about her journey through the career accelerator and the macro job that she just landed, which is super exciting. So Monae, welcome. Introduce yourself to the listeners. Just tell them a little bit about where you are in the world and, whatever you're open to sharing.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Monae Dale. I am from Los Angeles, California. I currently actually live in Signal Hill, but I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, and I've lived in Southern California my whole life, actually. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I've been in the field for 5 going on 6 years now, but fully transitioned to macro social work. So I'm excited to share a little bit about my journey.
Thank you again for agreeing to be here and for sharing your story, because I am 100% confident that your story will inspire other social workers to move into macro spaces. So let's get right into it. Can you explain to us what your career, your social work career looks like before entering the micro to macro program?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a little background. I actually entered social work school with the idea in mind to do macro social work eventually. So I did the macro social work track at my grad school program, but I also wanted to get licensed. I feel like the narrative is that you need to be licensed as a social worker to have that leverage. So after graduating social work school or grad school, I started out at a homeless service agency where I was a mental health worker, a case manager, sort of all of the above. You know, you did everything for your clients. And I worked with youth or young adults, ages 16 to 24, sometimes a little bit older. And I also at the same time worked in a drop-in center. So I was doing all of that while also providing coverage in this homeless service drop-in center. And I managed anywhere between 20 to 30 clients at a time. That also included field-based work. So I was pretty busy prior to joining the micro to macro social work program. And then also in that same agency, I also transitioned to become a program manager for one of our housing programs where I managed a small team of staff. We worked with clients once they got their housing subsidy here in Los Angeles. So we would be like responsible for them to maintain their housing and increase, the housing retention percentages in the county. So overall, I was overwhelmed and burned out and, really just looking to transition to something that I would enjoy a bit more.
Yeah, so so what you explained about the fact of it's common for social workers to hear that licensure is a requirement of a social work career is correct. We know that we heard it repeatedly in your cohort. I've heard it from the dozens of social workers that I've spoken to and worked with over the years. How do you describe your direct practice, like case management jobs, in the process of looking for macro social work positions on your own?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I don't want to say it's tough to describe the position. It's tough to like put it into simple words. I feel like, a sort of broad description is really feeling responsible for well-being of individuals. Like I was saying, the mental health component, their independent living skills, their benefits, all of those things. So I really would describe the direct case management practice of like being in a position as a social worker where I'm really sort of considering the whole person and working with the whole person to make sure that honestly that they make it day by day. And then the second part of your question, oh, the process for looking for macro jobs prior to joining your program. Honestly, I would sort of look for or use obvious terms for macro social work, like literally macro social work positions, things that I thought would pop up or that would generate sort of some sort of jobs that I can apply for. I wasn't really strategic in my search and I didn't really have a good plan going into it. I just thought that I can like Google those words and I would somehow come up with 100 jobs.
Yes. So I'm glad you brought that up because I kind of forget that that is a common experience of many social workers where because we're not taught a lot in our programs about macro work, we engage in job searching efforts the same way that we do for like case management jobs, where if you're looking for a case management job, you'll type in case manager, social work, social worker. So thank you for sharing of like what that process looks like for macro jobs where you're using the specific terms macro social work. What usually is the problem for social workers' inability to find those jobs, and this is just, I know you know this, Monae, but this is just more context for the listeners, is that the world does not know about the other side of our profession. They generally only know about, I love to name stuff, clinical, child welfare, stuff like that. They don't know about the other side. So heck, our profession as a whole doesn't know all that there is about macro social work. And that's proven in the research literature. So you're not going to find a job by using those terms. And thank you for bringing it to the surface because I kind of forgot about that.
Yeah, and can I just add a point to that too? When you were saying even in our own field, they don't really understand the scope of macro social work. So as I mentioned, I did the macro track in grad school, but even the focus of like the type of careers that you can have in that track were still very like limited. Like it was always like, and there's nothing wrong with any of this, but it was always you can be a grant writer or you can, what was another popular one? You can be a program manager. That was often even, described as a macro career choice when there's so many options that, we aren't aware of.
I'm glad you shared that because I actually just learned about that last month in my live workshop, how to land a macro social work job. And that was one of the things when I asked the attendees to put in the chat box about what are some of the common things they hear about macro work or why is it so hard to make the transition into that level of work. They always, a lot of them said that, they've only known that it was only grant writing job opportunities and I don't want to do grant writing. And I was like, oh my, I never heard that. So yeah, it's a multitude of different things that just are floating out there, but I'm glad you talked about that. So I have another question, and I'll probably come back to that conversation about looking for macro jobs. But why was it challenging for you to find a macro social work job on your own? And I know you talked about the job searching and the key terms, but what were some of the other issues that you faced or challenges that you came against?
Yeah, so I think in addition to knowing what to look for, doing it on your own without knowing what to look for requires so much effort and a lot of research, a lot of due diligence and consistency. And as I just spoke to, when you are in a job where you're burnt out and always tired, to then come home and to put in all this effort to find a job, it's like really exhausting. It's overwhelming. And you sort of just want to give up and like, I guess I'm okay where I'm at. So I think that was like a big issue for me too. Just like being consistent in my search was extremely exhausting. And then also prior to joining your program, and a big thing that like really shifted everything for me was that not really realizing how transferable your micro skills are to these macro positions. Like, you're thinking like, oh, I guess I did a little program evaluation, but there's so many things that you do that are macro skills that you can use when applying for these jobs that again, you just don't think of, or at least for me, I didn't have that. So I had to really shift my perspective to even think about those things in that way.
That's a great point. I want to put a pin in that about the transferable skills discovery, and I'm going to come back to that because I really want you to elaborate like what that process looked like for you, and when you made that discovery at what point in the program. So yeah, the overwhelm, let's talk about that. That's one of the major reasons that I decided that the Career Accelerator, like live coaching sessions, will be held on Sunday, because I remember in my own case management days, I didn't have the energy, the bandwidth, the time to dedicate to anything. Once I was off work, I was just in full recovery mode for the next day, like full on survival. So that's sometimes a question that I get from people that are potentially interested in the accelerator about, like, is it only on Sundays? Sundays is a perfect time for you to dedicate to your career development. It's the start of a new week. It gives you an opportunity to have dedicated time and space that's not interrupted by like, okay, I gotta go home and do these other things, or get up in the morning and go to work. So we found a lot of success inside of the accelerator by offering the sessions on Sunday. And thank you for talking about that, because overwhelm is real and it can sabotage any like aspirations you have for more, or to even just shift out of case management. How did you learn about my career coaching services? And so this is a two-part. The first part is, how did you learn about my career coaching services? And what thoughts or information helped you sign up for the micro to macro program?
Yeah, so I actually heard about your program through a friend who found your Instagram. I feel like you have a great presence on social media and LinkedIn and all those spaces. Yeah, so I one of my friends, she's one of my closest friends. We've known each other since undergraduate, and she knew that I wanted to transition to macro social work. So she ran across your Instagram page and then sent it over to me, and I was really excited. Like, I'm looking through the page, like, what can I get from this program? But I think some of the things that stood out for me and like why I wanted to pursue and enroll in the cohort was that you were a social worker who's been through the journey. I think that makes a huge difference. I think, there's tons of career coaches, but social work is such a unique field. Even to do micro to macro, it's a very unique experience. So I think that in itself stood out for me. I think just some of the feedback that you shared from other cohort members and the jobs that they had landed, even if they weren't jobs I was interested in, like the fact that someone's doing policy work or international policy work or whatever it is, like, okay, this is, this is the real deal. And then I think the consistency of you like constantly being active, constantly sharing information, even if we weren't signed up for the program, you still were clearly there for those of us who wanted to transition. So, yeah.
Oh, Monae, thank you so much. If you only knew the times I wanted to give up. But no, in all seriousness, like, yeah, because the services that I offer is what I wish I had. And it just didn't exist. So who better than to create? And again, as I said before I hit record, I think I said it when I hit record. Thank you for making time today to be on the podcast, because you sharing as a point of reference that it's possible is what other social workers need to hear, to know that, okay, I can do this thing. So let's talk about your macro career wins. I have been sending emails nonstop over the last 2 months about your career wins and the macro job that you landed. So let's get into that part of the conversation, because I love to talk about Monae's macro career journey. So can you start by explaining what was your journey in the micro to macro program inside of the cohort? Like, where was your thinking, like, once you entered, and then like throughout the whole process, or however you want to explain it?
Yeah, I think I really entered the program with an open mindset. Like, again, I been at this agency for 5 years at the time. I just wanted to see what I can do and to transition to a macro program. So when I came into it, I like really was looking forward to it. I came to it with no sort of prejudgment on what I thought it would be like. It was actually like, it blew me out the water, I should say that. But I didn't come into it thinking like, oh, it's going to be this way or that way. But I think a part of the journey and what I appreciated so much about it was that at the beginning of the program, like we're getting to know ourselves, like personally and then also professionally. So like, what are our hobbies? And I don't want to give away our secrets, but really getting to know like a lot of things about ourselves that you might not think about when you're trying to transition to a different type of work in your field. So I appreciated that because I'm like really started to do a lot of self-reflection. And like really thinking about like, what's important to me and like, what are my values and, what's my mission in this work? So I really appreciated that part of the journey. And then I think like, as we continued along, I think it just was like all the pieces just started to fall together. By us starting with this foundation, then I was just able to sort of put those pieces to work to start to find jobs and like really start to refine my searches for the macro careers that I was looking for. So I don't know, it just turned out to be great. I enjoyed the journey. I was sad when it ended, but it all just made sense and really helped me to self-reflect and really decide what was important to me.
Yeah, so that is major what you just talked about regarding self-reflection, and coming into the space with an open mindset. Because what I see just by observing on the social work internet streets is that there's a hyper focus on social work job titles, right? And I always talk about like, don't focus on the job titles because you lose your control over your career design and you are just going to repeat the same situation like you're finding yourself in case management. But I know social workers are like really, like I said, hyper focused on job titles. And a lot of that just comes from the lack of career education that exists in our profession. So I'm glad that you talked about the self-reflection piece and coming in with an open mindset. And you're right. Just a little bit of what you were talking about earlier, a large part of the framework is designing a career that aligns your personal interests, right? Because a lot of us think that, okay, it's only policy or even grant writing, like you said, but I don't like fundraising. I don't like to write. Why would you build a career around those things? You can still affect change and do what you enjoy just naturally as a human being. So I have another two-part question for you. What?
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to cut you off. I just want to, and I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but I just wanted to speak to the point around the not being so invested in the job titles, because my previous job title as a program manager at the direct serve or micro practice agency and my macro job now are the exact same job title, but they're worlds apart. So that just is so true.
That is a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up because naming conventions can be very different in organizations, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're the same and they just look different. So if you go look for a job and then you read the job description, you're like, wait a minute, what? That's not what this does, because then you're only used to it in a case management direct practice setting. You're not going to apply. So that's why it takes more than just job titles. It takes more than just networking, because you want to design a career that you like. I mean, you don't have to fall in love with working. We don't have to romanticize work, but the reality is many of us have to do it. And then even over and beyond that, many of us want to be in macro, which I know is true for Monae. She wants to be in macro spaces to affect large scale change, right? So in order to do that, you have to get crystal clear about what the goal is. So Monae, what were some of the challenges that you faced while in the program?
Yeah, not to be repetitive, but well, I did appreciate that the program was on Sunday. I agree that it just was refreshing and it felt like just a good day to sort of do that sort of work. But I was still actively in my job. So I still was experiencing this exhaustion and burnout. And one of the things that we talked about in the program, or that Marthea, coached us on, is like, you should apply to X amount of jobs a day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I just can't even fathom doing that after these long days of work. So that was like another thing, just again, the consistency. But I think also, even though I was learning the skills of how to change my resume or my cover letter to reflect the positions that I was applying for, it was so hard to constantly do that. Like, it was like it was encouraging, but discouraging at the same time, because like I'm doing this for all these jobs. I'm maybe not hearing back yet, but I have to continue to do that every single time. So that was also a big challenge for me. Like I remember I told Marthea one time, like if it has a cover letter requirement, like I don't even want to apply for it. And she's like, you cannot think about it that way. But I'm like, I just can't imagine doing it. So that was another thing, like just having to shift my perspective was a big challenge.
Yes, and Monae is not by herself. Social workers don't like to write cover letters. You have to write the cover letter. But I'm not gonna jump on my soapbox because Monae did the reenactment of me just wonderful, right? And so that shows that I did my job as a career coach. Let's talk about the job search requirements and consistency. And I really want to talk about the fact that job searching is a job. Looking for a job is a job. And because we are exhausted, overwhelmed in our current case management jobs, a lot of that flows over into your long-term career goals, like sabotaging it because like, okay, I don't have time to do that. I can't even think about that. And so usually by the time social workers engage in a job search or like plan or process, they are already past the beyond the point of like breaking. They should have left their job a long time ago. So then it feels even more overwhelming. Just a question, and I know we didn't like plan this out. Did at any point, did your job search process get more streamlined or like become a little bit more manageable for you once you learned the techniques and the strategies or got a solid system?
Yeah, I would say it did become more manageable in terms of like not wasting my time and applying for jobs that still didn't align with whatever my personal goals or mission was. So I think once I really got to that point and really understood what that was and not just like, oh, let me apply to any macro job so I can get out of here, then I think it did become a bit more manageable because like I'm gonna apply to X amount of jobs however many days, but now I can just focus on whatever this specific sort of arena is, which then becomes easier to edit my resume and my cover letter because I'm using some of the same language sometimes.
Yes, 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 yes. So yeah, having a targeted job search. Once like anything you learn, anything that you're doing new for the first time is going to be hard. And like we're talking about, there's a lot of outside factors at play. But to hear that once you like understood the importance of being targeted about your search, it then becomes just a little bit, still a job searching, a little bit more manageable. Thank you for sharing that. And I know I remember Monae and I having like some conversations about the fact, like, is that the job you're gonna apply for? Like, is that I don't. I'm like, connect the dots for me. I don't see how this job is what you've been talking about having. So that's what a lot of like my career coaching clients get inside of the accelerator. They get Marthea raw and uncut in full career coach mode because I'm not gonna question it. I'm not gonna go against like your decision to apply, but you got to make the dots connect for me in order for me to be bought in for it. I'm not the type of career coach that will just be like, yeah, apply. Yeah, that's great. Even because no, I want you to be in a situation where you can really affect change and thrive in your career. But let's talk about your transferable skills discovery. Monae was sitting on a gold mine of experience. Like she told y'all what she did in her social work career before landing her macro job, but she downplayed it. So that means I need to do more work as a coach. But let's talk about your transferable skills discovery specifically because I'm gonna pin that as one of your big breakthroughs. But if you have another one, please talk about that. What was like the breakthrough or the aha moment that you made about your transferable skills about like, oh, I really can do macro work. Like I can really compete for these job opportunities. In that moment that helped you like turn things around about your ability to transition into macro spaces.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm trying to figure out if I had like one aha moment or that was a breakthrough. I think some of the things, I know like we talked about it before, and I think you brought it up recently, but the fundraising piece, I didn't think of that as a big part of my job because we did it at a certain time of year and it was really targeted towards holidays, whatever. So it just was in the back of my mind. So that was one thing. I think some of the other things is like, not managing, well, a little bit of managing, but like doing all this work for other peers in the space, that was a huge transferable skill because I'm like responsible for, their onboarding and them learning how to work in the drop-in center. And I just was like, oh, I just like was doing that with my coworkers. Like it's not that big of a deal. And I think like one of the biggest things for social workers is that in a lot of macro careers, and I know you can speak to it, Marthea, it's like you are doing so much networking and talking and relationship building and convening. And that's all you do as a case manager. You just do it with a different population. So that's like one of the biggest things. Like, you know how to talk to people, you know how to communicate and convene, but you just don't think about it in that way, but it comes so naturally to us. So that was like one of the biggest things. And I find that one of the easiest parts of my job currently.
Yeah, so let's talk about your new job. Has it been 60 days, 90 days yet on the job?
It's been 60.
Okay.
Yeah.
So social workers that follow my work, they love to hear about what macro social workers are doing in macro spaces. So can you talk about the job that you landed and what you do, and maybe even some of the similarities? You just talked about a lot of them, but maybe some of the other similarities that you've identified since you've been in the actual position.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, my current title with my new job is program manager. So it's the same title that I transitioned from, or that the same title at the job that I transitioned from previously before coming into macro social work. But I work at a foundation and we do philanthropy. We're one of the largest foundations and we assist with finding places to give money to, depending on the teams that we're on and what our missions are. So I work on a very small team with a very specific set of money, so you should say, for lack of a better term. But my position connects to my previous role because me and my colleague, we find nonprofits to give to that are focused on homelessness and young adults. So that's exactly what I did, exactly where I came from. I'm so familiar with the nonprofit landscape in Los Angeles County and outside of Los Angeles County, but now I get to use that experience to inform people like, hey, have you thought of this nonprofit, this community-based organization that we can maybe give money to, or we can do due diligence on to figure out more about them. And it's similar in ways because, like I said, my direct practice is informing how I'm entering my day and my consulting piece and my current job. But a lot of it is still the networking, the going to events, going to panels, going to conferences, but I'm just on the opposite side of it. I am allowing people to talk to me about their experience as opposed to me talking to them about my experience. But I like coming to the work knowing exactly what they do, which I really appreciate. I'm like, I was there, I was you. I had the 30 clients, I had 35 clients. I've done that. So I really want to be on the side where I can like help your organization to grow.
Yeah. So Monae, we were in a one-on-one resume writing intensive, which is part of the Career Accelerator like services that you receive as being a part of the cohort. And, I always start those sessions off with doing fact-finding work to really uncover those hidden macro social work experiences that social workers have in case management settings. And so we were just talking, this is before we even started looking at, really looking in depth at jobs. It's just me trying to understand your work history. And Monae just like, I was like, okay, so, it's a lot of work to shift social workers thinking from case management to macro like work, larger work. And so I was just asking, like trying to dig things out. And I was like, so have you ever done fundraising? I know a lot of the times we as social workers have to do that in our nonprofit social service organizations, like when funds are inaccessible. And Monae just like casually shared, like, yeah, I led a effort or was a part of an effort where we raised millions of dollars for the organization. And she said it so casually, and I was like, what? What did you just say? She was like, yeah, we led it. And I was like, these funds are being used to run the program, the organization, and Monae can correct me on where I'm incorrect in my facts. But like she was so casually talking about it. And I'm like, that is your ticket to transition into macro work. There are philanthropic organizations that do just that, like raise money and distribute it out towards causes and issues, to do work rather. And what better way to make change than to ensure that your organization or the organizations that work with your populations or issues have the sufficient funding to do their work. Because we all, as a social worker, have worked in a social service nonprofit at some point in time where they just didn't have enough money to do what really was needed. So Monae is in the macro space now, really affecting change by making certain that these organizations have the funding that they need. And Monae specifically is very interested in youth development. So can you talk a little bit, and just so I can connect the dots for leaders, about just give us like a sample of maybe organizations that do youth development work that align with your personal interests, just so they can see how it can connect.
Organizations that I apply to or that my foundation works with?
That your foundation works with. Are there any youth development specific organizations that you all fund? Okay.
Yeah, we fund a lot, a lot of them. Some of the organizations that I can think of off the top of my head, and then a lot of them are LA County or California-based organizations. So some of them might sound familiar and some may not. But we fund an organization called, or partly fund an organization called Safe Place for Youth that work with youth ages 12 to, I think they go up to 25. We fund tons of workforce development organizations that are like really focused on ways to encourage youth to explore their options. We fund some nonprofit developer organizations that are building housing for youth and for young adults. There's so many, Marthea. Like the portfolio is really large. And again, I'm only 60 days in, but honestly, we're in anything that's related to housing and economic opportunity for my team, we have our hand in it.
And that's enough. Like after hearing the first one, or even just the scope of the practice of some of those organizations, just shows that you're moving the needle a little bit for youth and young adults. So
yeah, sorry. And one of the things that we're doing that's not actually on the giving side is my colleague and I are trying to organize and facilitate convenings with nonprofit organizations that are doing this work, so that we're like actually trying to change and move the needle. Obviously the donation piece is important, but like how can we come together, which I feel like we don't do well in LA County. It's like we're all just wanting to do different things and running the race by ourselves. So we're trying to like put together these convenings to like really start to move the needle and end homelessness, hopefully.
Yes, now that is a whole nother conversation about the siloed efforts in cities across the nation and the nation as a whole. And there are tons of macro organizations that are working to try to break down those silos so it can be more of a collective impact approach. So that's most definitely macro work, and I hope you have added it to your resume. But so what we're gonna do is wrap up. But what I want to talk about really quickly is how I knew that Monae would be a good fit for the micro to macro career accelerator program before she even enrolled. Was her one was her desire to do more into advance, and of course, like she said, get out of the position that she was in, but also that she had like real tangible experience on the front lines and a drive to, again, do more. That's the running theme in this conversation. She was a perfect fit. Also, Monae came to every conversation that we had before, during, and after being in the accelerator. She came in a space of being open to learning, and admitting that she wanted to learn more about developing her career as a macro social worker. So it's that whole open mindset piece that she talked about earlier. Monae, what do you want to share with the listeners before we wrap up? Is there anything that I didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about? Maybe you can tell them how to find you, connect with you. If you want to do that, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've constantly touched on this in a lot of the questions you answered, but the micro to macro accelerator program is really transformative if you want to do macro social work. It's very hard to do it on your own. And again, we have to do a total mind shift. That's hard to do it by yourself. So being in the program with Marthea and then other like-minded people, it really is transformative. So I can't say enough about it. Like, if you're thinking about doing it, you have to make that investment and go ahead and just take the leap, and it really will garner some positive outcomes. And Marthea is so supportive the entire way. So I just wanted to add that piece. And I think in terms of like finding me, my like social medias are usually pretty private, but in terms of like any work related questions or anything like that, you can find me on LinkedIn under Monae Dale, Monae, last name Dale. And I'm definitely always open to any sort of networking questions. Definitely have to pass it along and be a resource for anyone that needs it.
Yes, so thank you again for making time on your Saturday to be here with me and recording the podcast episode. For those who are listening in, if you are interested in learning more about the Micro to Macro Career Accelerator, I encourage you to attend my next live workshop, How to Land a Macro Social Work Job Using Your MSW Degree and Case Management Experience. It is a 2-hour live workshop opportunity for you to formally meet me learn about your needs, but you also to learn more about the common challenges that you will face in trying to navigate the transition from case management to macro social work on your own. As Monae explained earlier, you'll also get an opportunity to see others who has successfully completed the program and landed a macro social work job. And then I will also give you more detailed information about how you can join the next cohort. This is Marthea Pitts. You can connect with me on Instagram at _MSW coach. That is where I share the bulk of my macro social work career content. Happy macro career planning. Bye.